Growing up, my life revolved around perfectionism, starting at a very, very young age. I remember even being in elementary school asking to stay inside on recess so I could study for a test to make sure I could get 100% on it. And this carried out all throughout most of my youth, and I would say into my 20s as well, both as a student and then as a competitive and then professional athlete. And while it's good to try to do your best and stretch yourself to achieve lofty goals, I'm happy I had that part of me. Perfectionism definitely has a dark side where that it can be very limiting and very paralyzing and cause a lot of self-abuse because we are holding ourselves to these unobtainable, perfect standards. And I think for many people, it's very paralyzing and very damaging. And I've actually, quite a few people here have asked if I have anything to say on this. And while I'm not some guru or expert or perfectly evolved person that never falls into the trap of perfectionism anymore, I think I've come a long way from where I used to be in that I'm a lot more liberated from those mental behaviors and those constructs that would keep me bound into whether it's you're doing a task obsessively and you start it and stop it and do it over and over and over again because you don't feel it's right, or you complete it but then bash yourself because you never think it's good again, or you're just stuck in failure to launch. You don't even start the project or the task because you're so paralyzed by fear and this idea of perfection that you don't think that you can reach, that you just never even start the project that you're supposed to do. There's a lot of ways that this mentality can hold you back in life and really sort of dampen your experience as a human. And I found in my own journey to sort of overcome that limiting belief, there's been 4 things. There's probably more like sort of nuanced things, but there's been 4, I would say, major sort of thought paradigm shifts that I've consciously worked at and chipped away at to evolve out of the trap of perfectionism. So I'm going to share those with you today. Now, let's just jump right into it. Number 1, focus on the feeling, focus on the process. We've all heard that it's such a cliche quote, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, but there's a lot of wisdom in that. And when you are stuck in trying to pursue, to make something creatively especially, but maybe it's not creative, although I think creativity comes in many forms, not just the stereotypical, whether you're, dancer or painter, those are obvious creative things, writing, but even if it's something like writing a college entrance exam, there's still a certain amount of creative flow that goes into it. If you're going into a job interview or making a report for your job and you're stuck because you think it needs to be perfect, that's all creativity, just in some forms. There's a spectrum of it, and maybe it has more technical elements woven into it, but it's still creating something from nothing and giving of yourself in a certain way. And whether it is the spectrum of creativity of you're trying to write a novel or just do something technical like build a shelf in your home, I think the first place to start with it, to dismantle the belief, to dismantle, is just focus on not what might happen when you finish this certain thing, but just focus on the task at hand, coming back to presence, right? You hear that all over the internet, meditation, presence, mindfulness, but it's so, so important. And it's when you are really immersed in every task you're doing, whether it is something simple like building a shoe or something magnificent like trying to write a 800-page novel or whatever. If you just focus yourself on the task in hand and try and find the joy in it, or maybe if it's writing a sort of technical report for work that you really don't want to write, but still finding how you can apply some joy to it, finding how you can put your own unique spin and soul through what you're creating and find the joy of that, then it's going to give you a lot more flavor into the experience, and it's going to take the pressure cooker off of seeing whatever you're doing as a means to an end, because that can go hand in hand with perfectionism. Oh, I have to do this so I get the praise, or so I get the perfect score or whatever. But if you lose the joy in what you're doing because you're so worried about it being perfect, then you are going to be stuck and you're not going to be able to let it flow through. And An example of this is when I came from my history of a competitive synchronized swimmer. Everything absolutely had to be perfect. We could spend 8 hours doing just like one arm just over and over and over. Coach saying, that's not right, fix your angle, you're off count, you're out of pattern, you're on your back, you're late, that's the wrong angle, that's the wrong position, blah, 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 blah. You're not feeling it enough. There could be infinite things that we did wrong. And even when it was right, it's like, okay, well, that was good, but tomorrow we can do better. It was the infinite pursuit of perfection. Again, there's a light side to that too, because I do think it is cool to push yourself as a human being and see what you're capable of. But the shadow side of that is we all never felt like we were good enough ever. And that sort of was most of my childhood. And then going into the first part of show business, when I was in the show in Las Vegas, it was a Cirque du Soleil style show called Le Rêve. I've mentioned it here before, but in case you're new, that's that. But it was the same. It was, here's the choreography and you need to do it exactly this way for it to be right. And so that undertone of perfectionism was still there. But when I left the show, I became a go-go dancer for a few years, and that was actually one of the most liberating experiences because there was no choreography in it. Go-going is freestyle for anyone that doesn't know, and I would get up there and you're on stage for usually a 20-minute set and you don't know what the DJ is about to play, and there's a crowd of thousands of people in front of you, and it's just go, connect to source and give of yourself in that moment, and it just has to be pure joy and energy. And maybe you've got like it would have say like a stockpile of vocabulary of movements, but it was never what my history of doing this exact perfect count on this move that I rehearsed 7 million times. No, it was just move your body and go. And in that moment, I found so much more joy because it was so much more liberating. And the moves I was doing were not perfect at all. For sure they weren't, but it didn't matter. It was about feeling joy and connecting to source and giving something to the audience. And when I would see people and have that sort of exchange in the audience, it was such a cool feeling. And I know it's not because they're like, wow, look at her perfectly extended leg, or wow, she just did that exactly on the right note on the music, or wow, she just did that turn perfectly technically executed. No, they're not thinking that at all. They're just seeing an exchange of energy that you're being a vessel for. And that was sort of the first thing that pulled me out of perfectionism, because it was like, oh wow, this is way more fun to do it this way, and this is way more invigorating and joyful, and I'm getting the result I want, which is connecting and sharing joy and performing and giving energy and, being a light on stage. And I didn't have to be perfect to have any of those things. And in fact, I found there's more of a connection and more of a positive response without the perfection or the trying to be perfect, because your energy is flowing just a lot more freely. So you don't have to be a go-go dancer to have that experience, whatever it is you're stuck in on life. If you focus on the joy of what you are doing, and just forget about trying to be perfect with it and let that joy flow through you, the metric of having to make it perfectly executed will fall away a little bit. At least it did for me. Number 2, this is kind of spinning or continuing off of that. Release your attachment to outcomes. So often what traps us in perfectionism is, I have to do this, so I will get this. Whether it is praise or getting hired at a job or getting the approval or getting the position you want or getting into the school you want or just making the right gift a certain way or having your neighbors say your home looks great or having people say, oh, your kids are doing great. I think a lot of us come from households where our parents put these immense pressures on us, not because they didn't love us, but because we're little reflections of them. And it was out of love, though that can cause a lot of damage too. And there's infinite ways that we get stuck in trying to produce something because we're so attached to the outcome. And what is that attachment? That's fear. If I don't get this job, then I'll be toast. If I don't get into this school, then my life is over. If I don't get the perfect outfit for this first date, then that person's not going to want to see me again, and then I'll be alone forever. There's infinite ways that we trap ourselves in this thinking. But again, if you just go back to the feeling of it and go back to just being in the moment with it. And I think a big key part of this is trusting the universe or God or whoever your person of worship is, or just trusting life in general. Trusting that what is meant to happen will happen. What is meant to be will be. And even if that means you don't get into the school you want, or you don't get the grade on that paper, or you throw a dinner party and no one comments about how perfect your house is, so what? It's gonna be okay. Life is always evolving how it should be. And even when we get a no, rejection is protection and redirection. I forget, if anyone knows who the quote that is, please tell me, because I use it all the time and I don't remember where I heard it or who said it, but I've found that to be so valuable in my life. I'll say it one more time. Rejection is protection and redirection. If you don't get what you are hoping to get, it's going to be okay. Something else will come your way that is meant to come your way. And when you're doing something just for the joy of it, as I mentioned in point 1, the outcome matters less, because even if you pour your heart into this creative thing and nobody likes it on social media, or you don't get that word of praise or whatever, or you don't get the grade you thought, it doesn't matter, because you got to experience joy in creating that thing or doing that thing or showing up as a person how you wanted to show up. And that's the reward in itself. It doesn't have to be, as I said, this means to an end. If you're pouring your love and attention into something and experiencing joy while you do it, and less focused on what that gets you, it's going to be a much more joyful and rewarding experience. And you'll find that when you take that pressure off of the result, you oftentimes will get the result easier, because you're not so fixed in resistance and fear of, oh my God, if I don't do this exactly right, then my life is over, because that's a very sort of limiting construct that you're going to face. If you trust life to unfold the way that it's going to unfold, then you can just relax a little bit and enjoy the process of what you are doing. Which comes to point number 3, remember the bigger picture also. I think there's very few times where an endeavor that we take on really and truly is life or death. Those things do show up. I've used this example before of, if you're, say, a brain surgeon and you are operating on someone's brain, or you're, neurosurgeon and on their spine. Yes, you probably do have to be 100% absolutely perfect in that moment, or you will kill someone. So that is life or death. And that's your life on the line too, your license and blood, yada, yada, yada. That's a very specific example, but some people really are in that sort of circumstances. Or say if you're flying a plane, you don't want to crash the plane. Yes, I get that those examples are out there, and perfection is necessary in that circumstance, but those people chose that path. So that's that. But in general, with most things that you are taking on, it's actually really not life or death. And again, when you focus, going back to points 1 and 2, if you're having joy while you experience it, and you release the attachment to outcome, and you recognize that this isn't a life or death situation, and then just the pressure can come off of that as well. And when you, especially with something like, as women, we tend to get really caught up in appearance perfectionism, because we come from a time where women, our body and our appearance used to be our currency, because those were the only rights we had in the world. And thank God that we have evolved out of that for the most part, but it's still the pressure to look a certain way and have a certain aesthetic as a woman, and men too. It's for all of us, but it is definitely more weighted on women, I would say. That can be very daunting, and that can be very limiting as well. But if you start to get caught up in like, oh my gosh, my arms are this shape, or oh, I've got a little spot here, or oh, my hair doesn't look like that supermodel's or whatever, that's going to be really damaging for yourself and a limiting experience of life. And also, if you look at the bigger picture of, well, what do I have? Do I have a roof over my head? Do I have some people in my life that love me? Do I have some beautiful friends? Do I have food to eat? Do I have peace in my country? Not everyone does. I've had some people show up to these videos that are in Ukraine right now, or Israel, or other Russia. There's tension in so many parts of the world, and those people do have something bigger on their plate to face than they'd say, if my only problem was I feel 5 pounds overweight, like, I'd be doing great. There's always someone who's probably struggling more than you in life. And if you are watching this on the internet, chances are you are probably doing pretty well because you have access to internet. Do you have clean water to drink? Do you have your health? Maybe some of you watching right now don't have your health, and that's a big struggle. And I hope you find healing through that. But the sort of superficial perfectionism that we get caught up in, especially as women, of like, oh, I need to get my lashes done this way, or have this perfect, outfit on to be perceived there. I just think that's a really limiting way to live. And if you remember how much suffering is going on in the world and have gratitude for what you do have, the sort of cosmetic imperfections that we can get stuck on can fall away. Or even saying, going back to the job example of trying to do a perfect thing, complete something perfect at your job. Are you going to get fired if you don't? Well, likely, probably not. And you still have a job. And if you do get fired, then, well, that's, their loss. And that means that's just the universe trying to guide you into something that's perhaps more of a fit for you. So that's something to keep in mind as well, which brings me to point number 4. And this is probably the most important one. And this has been probably, I would say, the biggest journey for myself personally, is trusting yourself. If you don't trust yourself and you have inherent lack of belief in yourself and your self-worth and your abilities in the world, perfectionism will bind you in a straitjacket, and it will make it impossible to complete anything with ease, because at the end of the day, you're the one executing it. And if you don't trust yourself, you're never going to trust yourself to execute it to any kind of standard. Even if the perfect standard bar was lowered, then you would still be stuck in perfectionism, because you don't trust yourself to achieve what you want to achieve, to be able to execute what you want to execute. And I don't have a quick fix answer of, oh, this is exactly how you trust yourself, because it's something we are just so inherently lacking. I think in the West, we're not really taught this skill of self-love. I do have a video called The Most Important Person to Love. If you want to check that out, it's one of my older ones near the beginning. And then I also have a video titled Own Your Energy, Lessons Learned from Being a Go-Go Dancer in Las Vegas. But that one is about sort of more of a deep dive into self-confidence and self-worth and owning who you are in the world and your uniqueness in the world. If you want to check those out for a deeper dive on trusting yourself. But for the sake of keeping on track with this video, just bearing in mind, when you start to get stuck in a perfectionism loop, you can sort of unpack it and be like, ask yourself these questions. Am I too focused on the outcome of this? Am I thinking that this is life or death? Am I having the blinders on and thinking that this is the biggest deal in the world, when really there's actually so many other things that are more problematic that aren't my problems, and I have a lot to be grateful for, and this thing really isn't the biggest deal in the world? Or am I just not trusting myself to be able to get the job done? And that's the moment where I think the deepest work comes in, to where you actually can just really start to explore, okay, well, why don't I trust myself? Is it societal conditioning that's put on me? Is it because my parents said I'm never good enough, or my coach said I'm never good enough, or my teachers or whoever, or siblings or my friends? Or I'm just telling myself I'm never good enough because I'm constantly comparing myself to people who I think are quote unquote better than me. There's a lot of work to be done in that, but I think if you even just catch yourself in that moment and say, I'm procrastinating on this, or I'm not starting on this, or I keep looping and starting over and crumpling up the paper or whatever, because I don't trust myself to do this. And I think the first place to start is, they say fake it till you make it, and say, well, no, yes, I have the strength and the capabilities to execute this. And you can sort of remind yourself of other things that you've accomplished in your life. Coach yourself as if you were coaching a small child. When a kid is trying to learn how to tie their shoe, are you gonna say, oh, that's not perfect, you didn't do it right, you need to loop it this way and bunny ear or bunny left? My friend's kid, this is a really side note, but it's actually very hard to teach a child to tie their shoe, or at least it was for me. I was with my friend's daughter and she was like, I don't know, 6, and I was trying to show her, and I failed at parenting in that moment. But in those moments, you want to be very gentle with the child, right? And say, no, you can do it. Just try again. I believe in you. So coach yourself as if you're a small child in those moments, and remind them, oh, but you accomplished this yesterday, or you know how to do that. You're so smart, or you're so determined. I know you can do it. It sounds a little silly, but that's oftentimes what we need, is to sort of coach ourselves through things. And when you come back to that trust, as I mentioned earlier, of trusting that life will unfold how it's supposed to unfold, and then you couple that with trusting, okay, I'm stuck right now, and I'm stuck in fear, and I don't think I can do this, but let's clear out that noise and remember that I have the capabilities to do this to my very best, and I will give my very best. And I know that my very best is enough, and I trust myself that's enough. And either it's enough to get the result that I want, or it's going to push me in a different direction that is ultimately still the best option for me, because I trust that the universe or God, or whoever, whatever your language is for that, is on my side and working to my benefit. Okay, that is it for today. Let me know if any of this helped you, or if you have any other tips of how you've climbed out of perfectionism yourself. I would love to hear if any of this did resonate, and if it's something you think that you could apply. Okay, thank you for watching, my friends, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.